serving another king. Every single one of us can identify with living in some measure of a second choice reality. And so how do we adjust to delving into this, not just listening to like a really like cool and eerie story about a hand writing on a wall and be really impressed with this thing? First and foremost, you and I have to understand that exile means that you've been stripped of something. You've been stripped of the world you want to be living in. And so I've brought this up in previous weeks, but I want to bring those emotions up again. What is it that you have been stripped of? And I've referenced many things. Some of us have been stripped from careers we thought were going to work out. Some of us have been stripped from relationships we thought we were going to work out. Some of us have been taken advantage of financially, sexually, whatever else. Things that have been stripped, that have deprived you of living in an ideal. Maybe even living in something that should have been your right. It's not just like when you have unrealistic expectations and you were going to make $500K at 22 out of college. Those of us that graduated before '08, because that's what was going to happen, right? And then you come into exile and you're forced to go, how am I going to live here? Daniel's whole life is there. He has to embrace his entire purpose is never going to be in his first choice world. So, what are you resisting? And I think there are two types of mindsets in exile that we have to get into. The first mindset is guilt. We can be guilty that I should have done things differently, and that's why I'm not living in my first choice world, my first dream, my ideal. I screwed it up, and now look at my life. And you punish yourself and punish yourself and punish yourself. Or you punish someone else because you can't be real with why you're really upset. Guilt. Secondly, if it's not guilt, it's just frustration. I did all the right things. I should be living my first choice world, my first choice career, my first choice relationships, whatever it is. But I'm not, and I've done all the right things. So someone else has screwed me, God has screwed me, I'm not getting what I deserve. That's generally the two mindsets, guilt or frustration. But the third is kind of where I often find myself, and I do this a lot, right, is that I always find myself bouncing back and forth because I'm too holy to admit like where I'm really at. So I go back and forth, and I call this the questioning mindset. The questioning mindset is you can't decide that, okay, maybe I made some mistakes, maybe I didn't. Generally, I've been pretty good. So, Lord, why aren't these first choice worlds working out for me? But, I really realize that I ultimately, suck because I grew up in the Bible Belt. Yeah. I can tell many of you are not from the Bible Belt. That was a joke into the religious system that takes the Bible and hits you over the head. That wasn't really my childhood, but the religious system will basically say, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you're just a sinner, you're just a sinner, just a sinner. Okay, do we get that now? You guys were just sitting in the holy moment I was creating and I ruined it, right? There's no feedback today. Okay. So you've got guiltiness, you've got frustration, or you've got questioning whether maybe I did something, but really it couldn't have been because generally I've been pretty good. I compare to everyone else, and everyone else is screwed up, and these people that have screwed up a lot of things, they're thriving in their first choice world. And here I am in exile, not sure if I'm feeling guilty or not sure if I'm frustrated at God or somebody else. Can anyone say they're identifying somewhere, or have I lost you? Okay, thank you for that affirmation. So here's the deal. You may not have experienced exile like Daniel has experienced exile, where you've been stripped from your homeland. Maybe some of you have, your parents have. But if you've lived life on this planet, or especially in Los Angeles, you know the feeling of exile. The feeling of exile means you've been stripped from, you've fallen short, or you're searching for the life that you want to be living. It's the emotional feeling of searching for that life that you want to be living. You know what it's like. We all know what it's like to feel exile. So if you can identify there, then we enter into the story and into the invitation of exile. Exile, I believe, starts to show us the story arc of all of Scripture. The story arc of all of Scripture goes creation, fall, redemption, restoration. Restoration, we often just look at as like a New Testament thing. Jesus rose from the grave and puts everything right. And at some point, actually, like our life still sucks. But when he's going to come back and it's going to be great. And that's how we kind of butcher things. But the restoration piece is always present. It's always present. Because he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. The Old Testament prophets and patriarchs, they prophesied and lived towards something in the story that was a promise of who God is always and who you will be serving with your life if you will just say yes and surrender and trust that story. And so that restoration is ultimately, I heard someone say this many times, but I like it. It's one of those things that I'm not sure I love it, and then I thought, no, I love it. Restoration is essentially restoring your story. Restoration, restoring your story. So exile is the process of stepping into a retelling of the story and yours and mine. So turn with me to Daniel 5, if you would. I have large chunks up there. I am not reading this passage. It's too long. I'm just going to basically retell it to you. But as we do, I want to remind us that there's a couple consequences of not dealing with exile. The first is that you put hope in the wrong things. If you don't deal with what exile stirs up, if you don't deal with the pain that comes when you feel like you've been stripped of something, you put hope in the wrong things. You put hope in a career that might not be coming. You put hope in a relationship that might not be coming. Or you find that you have that career that you thought was going to give you that feeling, and it doesn't. Or you have that amazing family, and you put your hope in that family instead of the way of the kingdom. So it's either reordering, you put your hope in the wrong things, or you put your hope in great things that are just not the ultimate. And so I find many of us, it's more complex than just like I'm putting my hope in these purely selfish endeavors. It's these twisted things that are ultimately reprioritizing who you are. And we're going to talk about 3 tests today that the Lord takes us through in exile in this invitation from this king for us to let him refine us. Not in this like, this is going to suck and be miserable, but this is going to be the like, why do you still feel stuck in certain ways and mindsets? It's because you haven't let the invitation of exile break you free. Because Jesus has already paid for everything. So the consequences of not dealing with exile is you put your hope in the wrong things. Sometimes really good things. Or you can't appreciate what you already have. You put your hope in the wrong things, or you can't appreciate what you already have and what you've already got because you're still obsessed with what you don't have. All of these things tie back to an element of pride. Whether you're dealing with the mindset of guilt, the mindset of frustration, or the mindset of just questioning everything. All of these things go into, I'm the God of the story. God, where are you? Things should be different. I've done all the right things. Or, I suck. I've screwed it up. My life is never going to be what it should. I'm still the main character of that story. When I'm the main character of the story, pride wins. Pride isn't just jerks walking around and tripping each other and pushing them into traffic. Pride is you and I making ourselves the center of the story. I'm the main character. Instead, what we're doing with the story of exile is surrendering to a larger story and saying, Father, use me despite my failures, despite my limitations, despite my circumstances. I trust you in my second choice world. And now you may begin, Father. And I will not hold you hostage to another story and another dream. So basically, this is what happens in Daniel 5. There's a new king. We've had a new king like every story, right? I don't need this. New king in every story. This is the third king. This last week, or 2 weeks ago when I preached, this guy Belshazzar, his father, who also called himself Nebuchadnezzar, it's kind of like Nebuchadnezzar II. Nabonius is like another term that they used for him. No one cares. But the point is that he's ruling while his dad is still ruling kind of somewhere else. It was a big kingdom. And he's throwing this orgy, basically, a drunken orgy, and all of a sudden, he sees hands writing on the wall. He freaks out, and he does the same thing that his father and the Nebuchadnezzar before him do. They summon all the wise men to come and tell me what this means. And they can't do it. And then the queen mother, who was not at the party, comes in. And which is showing that she's like very much disapproving of this wild orgy. And she comes in, and she reminds him there's a man named Daniel that can give you this interpretation of these words on the wall. And so what happens is Daniel comes in. The point is that he doesn't know Daniel. He should know Daniel. He may be vaguely familiar with an account of Daniel, but Daniel is no longer an advisor. He's not in the court. He's essentially stripped himself of the presence of God. Daniel comes in, calls the king out, tells him to remember what God's already done through his father, and then that night the king dies. The city's taken out. That's the story. So that was Daniel 5. So I don't need to read it to you now, right? Okay, good. Don't say I didn't get in the scripture. That's the scripture. Now we're just going to go through what is happening in each section, and then how are these tests that this passage brings out, how are they for us to set us free? All right, so verses 1 to 4 is really starting to show us just kind of like the extent of this feasting and the debauchery and all of this stuff. Why is this king throwing this massive orgy party? Well, it's either because he knows he's screwed, and so what the heck, let's throw a party. But it's more likely that he thinks that's impossible and that no one can possibly take Babylon. To give you like a scale, I wish I would have put this up. Babylon's city walls are 300 feet tall. Does anyone know like a building about that tall? It's 30 stories in the ancient world. 30. So this isn't like, we watch these epic showdowns. Like the Colosseum isn't even close to as tall as this, right? So this is the tallest structure that when opposing forces come in, it's the tallest thing they've ever seen. It's also 80 feet wide. You can run 3 chariots back and forth like traffic along the roof of the wall. He's like, we're not going anywhere. This is impossible for anyone to take us. So his pride is warranted in some ways. So the language in the first few verses is basically the king is drunk and he's acting rashly. And he's drinking the Babylonian gods with vessels he calls in. He calls in basically the holy vessels from Israel's temple. And then he has his wives and concubines and nobles drink out of them. And we might think like, oh, that's horrible, but that's just their way. That's actually, even to the Babylonians, who we talked about in previous weeks, they're highly pluralistic, meaning they value people from all over the place. So everyone is kind of offended that this guy would be doing this. And all of the debauchery of all the kings before him, nobody has done an act like this. We're supposed to see this king, instead of learning from his predecessors, has gotten worse, and nobody even really wants to be doing it. There's hints along the way that it's like people are kind of following along with him, but he is sick and twisted, and more so than those that have come before him. He's going way further than anyone else. And then in verses 5 to 12, there's the handwriting on the wall. The language there is that he either collapsed or he literally pooed himself. That is what the Holy Hebrew is saying. And we're not sure which one because of the translations. The point is that kind of like everything was lost in his ability to function. And the language infers that only he saw the hand, but everyone else saw the writing. And he turns white. And again, as I said, as with each episode in this Babylonian dynamic with Daniel, he calls in the people And the Queen Mother actually highlights this contrast with the king, with his fright, with Daniel's abilities. There's a sense of sarcastic indictment when she says, there's a man in your kingdom, for a wise king would be primed to know that the quality of resources of his own people. She's kind of like making fun of him for like, you idiot, you don't even know what you have. And so then we move into verses 13 to 24. The king doesn't give Daniel a friendly welcome. It's actually kind of condescending. He's kind of making fun of the Jews in exile and who Daniel is. And Daniel doesn't give him the same level of respect that we see Daniel giving the previous kings. He's not rude, but he's kind of curt, and he's to the point. He communicates to this king that he cannot be bribed, and he rebukes him for not learning from his father. He begins by remembering God's response to his father's pride. For those of you that weren't here, it was an incredibly bizarre story of how his father had a dream and then became like a wild beast and lived like an animal for 7 years, like an insane person in the wilderness. That's what happened to his father. Then he came to his senses, and he gave the most clear proclamation to who God really was of any king, and actually acknowledged God for who he was. And now his son hasn't learned from that level of addressing the pride of his father in any way whatsoever, and is right here on the threshold of his own death and can't see it. So Daniel rebukes him for pride on two counts. First, that he's learned nothing from his father, and second, that he's exalted himself over the God of heaven and mocked Yahweh. He's reciting, one scholar says, the chastisement given to Nebuchadnezzar is done to show that Belshazzar, the king, that he bears special responsibility for understanding his father's punishment. The only reason this king is king is because his father is currently probably either enduring divine judgment and is currently insane, or he's over in watching another world, another part of the kingdom. All of this, what Daniel says, even though you, Belshazzar, know all of this, Daniel's like, you should know what just happened with your father. It underscores that he is entirely cognizant of these realities, and he's doing nothing. So the most powerful man in the world has every reason to have responded like his father. It's as if the God of the universe, despite the horrible circumstances that the Israelites are facing, living in their second choice world, it's like he's using that to say to the kings and to this powerful kingdom of Babylon that has everything, would you come and behold me? Next king, would you behold me? Next king, would you behold me? So many people like to look at the Old Testament and just see the carnage and the messes and interpret God the Father through that. If you're going to do that, you need to weigh that with the tension of this. How could that God be so patient with a people that are not his, that do not worship him, and that put up this amount of debauchery? And I just want you to see the man with the presence of God, his patience, his boldness, and his presence to come into a situation, not cast judgment, but to give presence. And I wonder, what would it look like if the Christian world responded the same when we just had a little opening ceremony that had a kind of gross depiction of the Last Supper? And yes, I've read all the things for those of you that think like it was a Greek thing and this and that. I know I've read all of the articles. My point is, what would happen if we stopped arguing with each other and we're just the rational, loving, present people with God's presence in the room? Instead of getting all caught up in the noise. Also, it kind of takes us back to like, you can look at that in two ways. Oh, the collapse of Western civilization. Maybe. But it's a drop in the bucket compared to where we were several hundred years before Christ. I have a hard time when people keep saying the world's just getting darker and darker and darker. I don't know. This is a bit darker than a 5-minute TV special with the Lord's Supper on it. All I'm saying is this: give yourself perspective of the entire story. Come and behold him, then make a comment. Okay, are we all right? Silent today. It's okay. I'm going to be okay. All right, so I'm going to run through what these words mean. If you read the scriptures, I think it posted behind me, verse 25 to 31, you see the words, many tekel parson, something like that, right? The first word is a unit of weight, namely 1/60th of a talent in the Babylonian system. The second word is equivalent to the Hebrew word for like a shekel or a monetary value. The third is plural of the word perez, a monetary unit meaning either half a shekel or half a mina. It means it's divided. The forms of double play on words with the consonants being the same based on their meaning to divide, and Persia is talking about how Persia is approaching the lands. I'm getting all that to just show you there's a lot of stuff that you will get bored of if you read it. That's really important, though, to just get this reality. It's that Daniel could just see. They're seeing nouns on the screen, and Daniel is doing this thing where he is interpreting it in what's called like passive participles. And what he basically then says is he's taking the nouns, which in the natural reading, they wouldn't know what to do until they see how the vowel is pointing somewhere. And what Daniel ends up doing is taking these words and showing them that what it means is that God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. You have been weighed. That's where the money things come from. And your kingdom has been divided. So they knew the nouns, but they didn't have the interpretation. And this is how Daniel got there. And this is the way the Semitic languages work. And it's why none of the wise men could decipher the message. Without vowel pointing, it's difficult to know what's intended. So Semitic languages, that's how they work. Daniel, obviously, is communing with God, and he's giving the directive of what these words mean. God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. You've been weighed. Your kingdom has been divided. In light of this, there's three judgments. First, the judgment of Belshazzar's kingship is what Daniel tells him. Second is the judgment of him personally. And third, he specifies the next stage of God's plan for the world's empires. The idea of God weighing a person's motives and actions like a balance scale is found throughout the Hebrew wisdom literature. That's important to note, because that'll be our first kind of test that we go through. Belshazzar has been found wanting for his failure to humble himself and acknowledge God as the Most High, which Daniel is obviously saying he had plenty of opportunity to do something about. Okay, so that is the storyline. Now, I just want to address pride for a moment. C.S. Lewis has said, I think, some of the most profound and important words. His chapter in Mere Christianity, I think it's chapter 8 if you go in there, where he talks about the concept of sin, is really talking about pride. I'm going to read a couple quotes because they're good. Is that all right? You like quotes? I have not the first quote, Paul. I'll have the second quote up in a second. The first quote that I don't have up there, he says, "Pride gets no pleasure out of having something, only out of having more of it than the next man." I've read this quote before. We say that people are proud of being rich or clever or good looking, but they are not. They are proud of being richer, cleverer, or better looking than others. In that chapter on the great sin in Mere Christianity, Lewis says, according to Christian teachers, the essential vice, the utmost evil is pride. Unchastity, anger, greed, drunkenness, and all that are mere flea bites in comparison. It was through pride that the devil became the devil. Pride leads to every other vice. It is the complete anti-God state of mind. It is pride which has been the chief cause of misery in every nation and every family since the world began. So pride is a big deal. What I want us to do is to look at basically 3 applications, and we'll be done. 3 tests to break free from pride. The first test is the weight test. And this goes to this king is being weighed. The language of weight and measure, again, is standard language in the ancient world. The common issue were items that were supposed to hold value, like coins, looked right on the outside, but on the inside they were hollow, and the only way for them to be certain of the value was to weigh it and measure it. So that's what they did. They were weighing if it had any value. So weights were on one side of the balance, and the currency, the value you possessed, was on the other. Value was not based upon someone's outer appearance. The value is predicated upon what was on the inside. They did not want to be duped by a shiny object. And they had this whole thing about you're hollow. You're not weighted. When God writes on the wall, Daniel is saying, God says he's placed you on his balance. He's weighed you. You're too light. There's no weight to you, Belshazzar. There was nothing strong or secure inside this king. He had a crown, but it was hollow. He had money, it was hollow. He had prominence and prestige, but he was a hollow-hearted man. In our pursuit of worldly things, we can find things that will provide us some power, some security, but they don't have any weight. In our pursuit of this first choice world in our lives, sometimes we find measures of success and contentment and satisfaction, but things are stripped from us. And when they're stripped, what do you have left? Do you feel lost, bitter, hollow? Even the things that you love that are worth loving, if they were stripped from you, your family, your ministry, if that was stripped from you, would you be finished? Is that the summation of who you are? I don't mean like it'd be totally normal for that to rip your heart apart. I just mean, would the substance of who you are still be there? Would there still be the gospel that you could stand on? Or would the gospel that you live in and through and by, would it be demolished in your life? And would you feel like, I can't even follow this God anymore? Because if that's the case, and sometimes it's impossible to know where we're at until we're tested through the fire of that in life. But it is possible to just weigh up what we value, our value system, and to say, am I living my life for the stuff that's weighty? Or am I hollow inside? The weight test. The Old Testament's clear that God weighs and measures our hearts. Job says, if I had walked with deception and my foot had hurried after deceit, let him weigh me with accurate scales and let God know my integrity. Job knew what it was like to be tested. And he was found nowhere close to hollow. He had substance. Proverbs says, all the ways of a person are clean in his own sight, but the Lord examines the motives. What's going on here is the Lord is examining this king. But the invitation is for you and I to examine ourselves, because we will likely never get to the place of prominence of this king. But every single human being knows what it means to read the handwriting on the wall. Is there substance in your life? We like to talk about our food having no nutritional value. A person that crumbles under scrutiny. We're watching our politicians like, are they real or not real and all of that. But is there conflict in your soul? Where are you living for something of substance? I've told this story before. There's a Harvard study on happiness that goes, it's the longest study on human happiness in history. And they've studied these Harvard graduates alongside sometimes often people in the Boston area. And there are these two guys named John Marsden and Leo DeMarco. Marsden grew up, he was from a wealthy, successful family. He had a killer career, and he had a dream of being a successful lawyer, and he was. Leo DeMarco went to Harvard and dreamed of becoming a famous writer, and he had everything going for him. He went to Harvard. He ended up not being a famous writer. He became an English teacher. He got married, and they tracked these men throughout decades and decades and decades. They were some of the original members of the study. And what they found is that at the end of the day, the one that had all the success was miserable, his relationships fell apart, and he questioned all of life as he sat down at the end of life. And the teacher, who never got his first choice dream, they found when he had to then switch his life dream to what he could tangibly invest in, instead of looking at a dream that was never going to happen. And he was the most content and happy of the whole study. They don't say that in a lot of the things that I found in people responding on this study, but he also happened to be a faith-filled, church-going man. He didn't go to brunch on Sundays. The point wasn't that he was happy because he went to church. The point is what he invested in. He sacrificed his first choice world. And this, what I find so profound, like I was like captivated when I read the story for the first time. I've just done searches online. That has been like reposted and shared in 1,000 different ways. And if you think about it, that story is like the most simple, ridiculous story ever, even though it's a true story and beautiful in some ways. It's like, if you would just tell someone, hey, do you think if you just invested in your killer career to make a bunch of money and be successful, or you invested in your like family and relationships and the life like right in front of you, which is going to be more important at the end of your life? Who would have the wrong answer? Like nobody's going to have the wrong answer. And so why do we wrestle with this, and why do we still need to feast on these examples and testimonies? Why? Why do I still need to receive from these two men? Because I still need to come and behold him. Because it's so easy to be pulled outside. It's so easy to redefine my worth by the stuff that no one's going to care about. Exile is the invitation to be stripped of everything and to step in to a life that not only will you discover is far more satisfying and purposeful. It'll have the impact for generation to generation to generation. Come and behold him. So that's the first test. That's the test where we ask ourselves, is there any weight? The second test, and I'll go faster on these last two, the security test. Where is our false senses of security? The weight test is like, is there substance in me? The security test is why or why not is there any substance? That's what the security test does. If you're stripped of that thing you're invested your life in, will it crush you? It can be a career, obviously. It can be family. It can be ministry. It can be good things. It can be bad things. But we all want security. We all want 300-foot walls with 80 feet wide that's never going to crumble. And we all learn that it's all bogus. There is nothing in this world that can provide that security. One of the beautiful things that's happening on a global scale as we see globalization and information going and security breaches and all of these things is I think we're starting to get the fact that the American dream and even just living in a country like America isn't as secure as it felt a little while ago. It's rattling us. And that's why I feel like on a tangible level, true revival is present because just you and I on our personal daily lives can start to take hold of something. It's this scale. It's what is going to define me. What am I going to put my false securities with? And how am I going to just eliminate that from my life? And how am I going to start investing in the stuff that is weighty? And here's the thing, we all try to do this. And it's these subtle lies. It's these subtle pulls that pull us away. The security test asks if we've missed the writing on the wall that God has directed our way. None of us know when our time is up. We all know that. Will we have accomplished all that God wanted for us, or will we miss it in pursuit of perfecting our sense of security? What is it that's actually weighty in your life? What areas of our lives are we seeking to give honor to our own glory and our own story, if we're really honest? None of us will go like, hey, what are you up to? Well, I'm trying to live for the honor of my own glory. It's like ridiculous. It's why you read a story from Daniel about these kings and you're like, awesome story, God is awesome. And you have no connection to what does this mean about my own life? How does this challenge me? How does this strip me naked and let the God of the universe see me, test me, and refine me? But this is how. This is how, because at the end of the day, it's pride is still sitting right beside every single one of us. Will you agree with the questioning? The original question, the original downfall in the whole story was, did God really say, did he really mean, and does he have the final authority on this? Can I trust his version of the story? Or do I have a better version of the story? Is he the main character or am I? Can you see anything in your life that you're tempted to trust in for security? More than a father. Finally, the warning test. The writing on the wall. And I want to remind us that God is so patient. King after king after king. Generation after generation after generation. Daniel has been present in the entire thing. What you're meant to learn and to see here is that the writing on the wall isn't there from an angry, vicious, judgmental God that just wants to punish you. It's from a God that's given chance after chance after chance. And the cold-hearted direction that pride will take you when you completely deny him, which none of us in the room are there, or you wouldn't be sitting here. But that's what when pride has any foothold on our hearts, that is the directive that it will ultimately take us. And he's given you and I examples that we need to take notice of. This king's downfall was he did not take notice of the examples that came right before him. And that was Daniel's sobering message to him. You haven't listened to the examples that God has graciously given you. But what are the examples in you and I's life? Are we so fixated in our first choice world, we've missed all these examples in our own lives? We've missed the amazing parents that he gave us. Or maybe that was incredibly hard, and you've missed what you were meant to glean from here you are despite difficulty in family and upbringing and childhood and whatever it is. Every single one of us have seen and lived bad examples and good examples. And in the midst of all that, we have the beautiful revelation of Jesus that comes into the story. And the Father is saying, despite all of this and where all of human history is going, I'm giving you my most precious child to come, to live, and to die for you so that you can see what I'm like and that you can step into this story, that you can say yes to, surrender to it, and put aside these other stories that are going to ruin you. And at the root of it is the lie of pride. Whether you're frustrated, whether you're questioning, or whether you're angry. I'm going to bring this story up again in a couple weeks, but I mentioned it in passing, and I've just been sitting on it. The Moravians were this little group of people in Germany. And their first missionaries they sent out were these two boys, young men, that were selling themselves into slavery so they could reach these people that hadn't had the gospel. And they stood on the boat, likely looking through in chains and bars. They looked out to their friends and family that were going to see them for the last time, and they said, "May the Lamb who was slain receive the reward of his suffering." And that was the mantra the Moravians prayed into for generation after generation. May the Lamb who was slain receive the reward of his suffering. When you come and behold him, when you deal with pride, when you deal with the test of warning, when you deal with the test that comes from a king, whether you're a slave, whether you're rich, whether you and I here 2,000 years later, 3,000 years later, can you look at your life, weigh it up, and say, ultimately, what do I want from my life? May the Lamb who is slain receive the reward of his suffering. Israel's exile was not the end of the story. Christ's crucifixion wasn't the end of the story. And our exiled world is not the end of you and I's story. I want to ask us a couple questions as the team starts to come up. What ways has God been warning you and I that it's time to take back certain lifestyle bents that you may be living? What are the subtle things that you're living into? Many of which that may not even be bad. They may be things that are absolutely amazing things. It can be almost sacrificial things that you're doing for other people or children or whatever. If you are doing that with any measure of trying to make your worth a part of the doing, you've missed what this is inviting us into, and you are toying with the spirit of pride. But what are the bents in our life? And maybe there are some of you in the room where this is just a real sobering reminder. I've lost sight. I've lost touch. I'm distracted, I'm discouraged. I'm daily just getting up, and I feel like I've got all these amazing things. I love the Lord, but I'm just grinding. Is possibly the grinding because there's just things that you've let just get away and get sloppy. Is God leading you into something new today? Are there warning signs? Is there handwriting on the wall in your life? That this practice, this rhythm, this routine, some of the loves of your heart, you know where that's going to go if you let that go. Are you learning from them, or are they tormenting you? The hope of Jesus is that you and I are not sitting at a dinner party reading handwriting on the wall, prophesying our doom and our death because of a wasted life. Your life is not wasted. I just want to invite you to stand, and as you stand, I want you to remember the way of Jesus. I invite you to remember the future that Jesus promises. And I want to invite you to realign and restore your life around His. Holy Spirit, we give you permission to reorder our life. Let us behold you today in a way that makes everything else just not taste as good, even the perfect Sunday brunch. Pull us towards the beauty of your vision, of your kingdom and your story. We give you our first choice world so that you can restore us into yours. We bless you in Jesus' name.